Citizens' charter rights obviously take a prime concern in these issues. However, we do work with protesters to try to resolve things peacefully whenever there's leaders identified and or willing to work with us. That's not always the case, and that's not always the case with what we're dealing with today. We certainly aim to minimize disruptions to the community and escalation whenever possible. And we also use negotiation and liaison tactics to try to achieve a range of objectives. We balance our powers to act with discretion and judgment of when to act. So police action at any time must be considered carefully, knowing that sometimes arrests are necessary and appropriate, and sometimes ticketing might be necessary and appropriate, and sometimes discretion of not acting is appropriate. So all of these tools have to be considered as part of an overall strategic plan on how to manage the event. To give you context, so I would be considered the gold commander for this event. So we use an internationally recognized gold, silver, bronze command structure. And so it's my job to set the strategic objectives of how to resolve these matters, considering the full range of impacts, full range of factors as well. So each event, as you can imagine, has its own unique dynamics and impact on the community. And so all of these need to be considered ongoing as we set the strategic priorities. So the action over the last 2 days is where I'm getting to now, is a specific result of escalating safety concerns from the site that we received from multiple sources. These include the public, these include government sources, and these include our members' own interactions with the site. So Superintendent Bonnie Emerson is going to give some context to what specifically I'm talking about here and around the work that her police liaison teams have been doing on an ongoing basis down at the site that both inform us and try to mitigate the risk. So I'll call her up and then I'll come back for questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bonnie Emerson, Superintendent with the Winnipeg Police Service, BONNIE-EMERSON. So, hello, I'm Superintendent Bonnie Emerson. First, context is important. It's a complex and dynamic situation. There's a lot of information and a lot of misinformation regarding these types of events. There's vastly different viewpoints, issues, and perspectives to consider. I think it's important that we all slow down and share some relevant information and listen to each other. In the context of what Superintendent Dalal said, there's a national framework on police response to mass assembly and demonstration. It's based on a Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, Policing with Indigenous Peoples Committee. Information on this committee and on the framework is accessible online for the public. So you'll be able to access it at any time through their website. But it is a national framework so that there's a consistent approach across Canada for national large-scale events. What we're starting to see for the last several years is events internationally, nationally affecting the local affecting the global, and vice versa. It was the Policing with Indigenous Peoples Committee that developed the national framework to assist police services in ensuring preparedness for demonstrations and assemblies. I'm on the Policing with Indigenous Peoples Committee, and I'm on the Training Commission that helps provide training for police officers across Canada for the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. Winnipeg Police Service hosted a training course for liaison police officers in June of this year. It's the first time that this liaison course has been held outside of Ontario. So just to make a statement, as far as the police service, through the liaison context, I'm one stream when I said there's a lot of information and things to consider. One stream of information when we look at the approach for the liaison officers, where I share information through a chain of command through Superintendent Dalal. Our police liaison officers, members, have engaging with leadership, people, partners, stakeholders who would be affected, and the campers, occupiers, protesters themselves who who are at 450 Broadway, which is the Manitoba Legislature. We have engaged the citizens at occupying the camps since June 1st of this year over 80 times. It's recognized, or I should say, issues arising as a result of persons or group exercising their democratic rights in a peaceful manner that does not pose significant hardships on others or a risk to public safety shall be addressed on the lowest competent level. We recognize as a service that people have a charter right to safe and peaceful assembly, and we support that right. So the conversations that we have, our underlying role is to ensure public safety and to keep the peace. I think it needs to be acknowledged that the Winnipeg Police Service may have no role to play in the underlying issues that may be interest for the people who are protesting, and we're not in a position to resolve them. But the liaison officers, through mediation, interest-based negotiation, do engage. We ensure they know what our role is. We ensure we know what their rights, what their responsibilities are. And the bottom line is we're here to facilitate peaceful, safe, lawful protest. We have open communication. We utilized interest-based negotiation, as I said, and we work with partners and the people protesting themselves to try to just slow things down, de-escalate it through the measured approach, which is part of the framework. I could probably go on and on and on, but I wanted to be able to make the comment about we have engaged with members of the North Camp, which is what the information shared in the news release. There's a secondary camp structure that is still currently there on the east side of the Legislature ground. We have been engaging with people at that site since summer of 2021, and with the North Camp since the summer of 2022. Yeah. I don't know if you have any specific questions. I just wanted to provide an overview, but if I've left anything out about liaison work or the framework, I'd be happy to answer those questions.
I'm wondering if one of you, I'm not sure who can tell us what you would say to any of these folks who are thinking on coming back. I know that these people are not in custody when we looked this morning. Do you have a message to anyone who is thinking of coming back or setting up a new camp at the Ledge?
Yeah, so there's certainly, unless somebody's released with court conditions not to attend there, that's one story. There's no problem protesting down at the Legislature. You've heard from the provincial government, that is a place for protest, that it will continue to be a place for protest. However, there is now a law in place in this land that prohibits new structures being built, and that will be enforced.
Can you talk a little bit more about this new law and how it may be helping you? Is it helpful? I know it's not a criminal law. There's a fine that people can get. Can you just talk about maybe the new tool is in your toolbox?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a tool in our toolbox. It's simply a new law that government passed that we will respect. We respect all the laws that are passed and we act on them. Now, what you've heard today is that we continue to balance the need to address laws that are of the land with police discretion, depending on the totality of the factors involved.
One more question for you. Looking at the list of items that were seized, I don't see any weapons charges. Can you talk about that? Would these not qualify for a weapons charge? Because I know yesterday we were told that there were weapons found. I do see a machete listed here.
So those weapons, from my understanding, were found in the structure. They weren't being carried at the time around by the persons that were arrested. So they wouldn't be charged with possessed weapon type charges.
And then, sorry, one more question. I know there was criticism yesterday that it was Red Dress Day and that the arrests were happening on that. Would you like to address that?
Yeah, it's a very unfortunate timing that this occurred yesterday. And I think our first media release addressed the fact that we regret that that operation had to take place. But we are also duty bound to act when people are at risk, and we don't control when people put us in that situation. And yesterday was a situation where we were forced to act.
So of the 12 people charged, are they still in custody or have they been released as far as now?
My understanding is the majority of them have been released, some with conditions, and some are still going through the process of the court release process.
So can you talk a bit more about the risks that police were present there and why the operation had to take place yesterday?
It comes down to our interaction, well, the three different sources of information that I mentioned. So both information from the public, from government officials who are working at the site and having to come face to face with these individuals day to day, as well as our police liaison teams who are interacting. What we saw was an erosion of cooperation and an increase in both rhetoric and aggression and a complete unwillingness to be reasonable around restricting expansion of the camp. They were intent on building more and more structures contrary to the law of the land. So once we found that they were, as you saw, probably through some footage, willing to physically get into it with officers, then we have to be forced to act to provide a safe environment for everybody.
It was very simple.
I can just quickly comment, two comments. You had asked that, do we have a statement for any people who wish to safely demonstrate? So you have a charter, right? Section 2 of the charter to peaceful assembly and demonstration. And we're not, we support the public's right in that. The message is that peaceful, lawful, safe demonstration continues to be supported. While Superintendent DeLull and other members were engaged, there was a lot of work that members of the liaison team and myself specifically reaching out to Indigenous leadership throughout on an increasing basis, especially in the last 7 days, to let them know where I could that the situation was escalating. There's other influencers with the liaison work to see if we can engage with people who may be able to assist and to de-escalate. The fact that it happened on October 4th, there was a lot of discussion in the police service. This was a significant day for the MMIWG Day of Action. And that if safety wasn't compromised or a concern that it would be compromised, that if the choice would have been ours, certainly would not have been our first choice. So I think when I started this, I said that we need to look at the complexity of situations, and the police, when we engage in this and support people's rights, we want to be impartial as far as the underlying interest and causes for these demonstrations, but we're not neutral. When safety becomes a factor, we are obligated and must respond, and we did respond yesterday.
So the police believe there was imminent threat to safety at the North Camp yesterday. Is that the correct takeaway here?
Well, I think that there's, again, with the totality of the situation was escalating, that when we look at engagement and the de-escalation of a situation, as long as there's continued engagement and willingness to de-escalate, those are very positive signs. And in this situation, again, once the enforcement happens, then the liaison members, that's no longer part of our role. But we don't want to wait till people get hurt. So we have to assess the situation and the information we have at the time. So it was based on a number of factors.
And so to be clear, what we're talking about here and the escalating rhetoric, et cetera, this is in reference to the North Camp and the people there rather than the East Camp.
Yeah, I think the fact that when you look at what the press release was and where the actions for police were taken.
Just to be clear.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
But that said, there still is another camp on the grounds. It's contravening the new legislation. I mean, what's the plan with for police enforcement? The Minister of Justice yesterday said it's in police hands.
It definitely is. And it's up to us to continue to assess the risks every single day, continue to gather information, determine whether the situation has changed to the point where we do need to take a different approach. But at this point, we are still on the path of trying to resolve that camp peacefully as well.
So continued conversations with liaison
Absolutely.
officers and that sort of thing. So there's not an imminent enforcement action plan against the other camp.
There's no enforcement action plan, but like I said, at any moment, we could be forced into taking action to preserve public safety. So we are trying to let a peaceful resolution evolve out of this.
So, I mean, was this the resolution that the police service wanted here on the North Camp specifically?
Police service never wants to have to become physical and arrest members of the public. Our goal is always to resolve matters peacefully and through negotiation. We aim for cooperation.
The national framework, when we look at it, the advocacy for, Superintendent Dalal, there's been a number of members in leadership within the police service. Liaison work is fairly, formally liaison work is fairly new for the Winnipeg Police Service. And this has been, I think, significant positive work that the service has taken where having a voice at the table and allowing the partners that myself and the liaison team are engaging to have a voice at the table has made a positive difference because it has allowed us to have further tools to de-escalate this. So the parameters and the foundation for this national framework, the measured approach, and it is education before enforcement. So I promote that, will continue to promote that where possible, where we do not want to use force on citizens. We must look at alternatives before we would engage in that. So, and that will remain an important tenet.
So there were 12 people charged. Were there any other people at the camp or supporting that were cautioned or warned, or is it just the 12 as far as you know that were engaged with police?
There's just the 12 that I'm aware of. There's still people down there, but they weren't involved in the actions.
Were the two camps linked in any way? Like, was there dialogue between, the group that ran the North Camp and the group that's still around the East side? That you know?
So Superintendent Emerson could probably speak to that better. We certainly are aware of some folks that moved between the two camps. They had specifically different ideologies of why they're down there, but that's not to say that folks living rough aren't supporting each other.
We had several members were spoken to throughout the last few days that did leave and were not charged. The camps themselves and the people occupying them, there's of course you're within a few hundred feet of each other. So there is connection and conversation and dialogue, but the leadership is vastly different between the two camps.
Well, and yeah, we could tell the results. One's still there and one isn't. Can you expand on how the ideologies differ between the two at all? Like Sergeant or Superintendent Dalal mentioned that.
Well, and again, this is where when you're looking at interest-based negotiation, it's important to recognize, but I will say a tenet of what we're seeing across Canada for protests, in some cases professional activism and protests, is that there is sometimes it evolves and changes and there's different participants in the camp. And so for the North Camp, I can share that the evolution and the expressed interest changed quite a bit.
But from what to what?
From what they articulated that they were there for, what they're expressing, what they wanted, when a specific interest was stated, and one of the supervisors of our liaison team said, "Okay, I think I can make that happen," then it completely changed and was off the table. So there was not, from the leadership of the North Camp, they were no longer willing to engage in that conversation.
What was that interest?
Well, I'm not going to go into the specifics of as far as what the interest was.
What was the timeline of the change? Was this an overnight thing over a couple of days where this suddenly changed on the police?
It was within you, within the leadership of the North Camp said, I would like this. The liaison supervisor said, okay, I think I can make that happen in 2 hours. Let's have a conversation. And there was no longer any interest in making that happen.
Any more questions? Hearing none, thanks for coming.